Most people carry more weight than they need to. These are emotional attachments, unnecessary worries and dependencies that, little by little, turn life into a prison. But what if there was a way to release these burdens without having to face major confrontations or abrupt breakups? Silent detachment is this subtle art. Contrary to what many people think, it does not mean distancing yourself from everything and everyone, or adopting a cold and indifferent attitude. On the contrary, it is about learning not to be dominated by what cannot be controlled. It is about finding peace without having to prove anything to anyone. This concept is deeply rooted in Stoic philosophy, which for centuries has taught us to accept life as it is, without useless resistance. But applying this in our daily lives requires more than motivational phrases. It requires a true internal change. Many fail because they interpret detachment in the wrong way. Others do not realize the invisible traps that keep them trapped in what they should have let go of. But there are hidden keys that can make this process easier, and some of them are surprising. Along this path, 6 lesser-known principles of silent detachment will be revealed. Some will challenge commonly held beliefs, others will raise uncomfortable reflections, but they all point in the same direction: genuine, emotional freedom. Now, let's start with the fatal error that prevents many from achieving this freedom. Detachment does not mean stifling feelings. This is the most common and, at the same time, the most destructive mistake people make when trying to adopt a Stoic mindset. They believe that in order to become immune to the pain of loss, they need to completely shut down their emotions. But repressing what you feel is not detachment. It is building an emotional dam ready to burst. The Stoics never taught that we should become cold or indifferent. On the contrary, they believed that all emotions are natural and inevitable. The problem arises when we allow ourselves to be swept away by them. True Stoic detachment is not about avoiding emotions, but about learning to observe them without being controlled by them. Imagine someone grieving the end of a relationship. If they try to ignore the pain, pretend they don't feel anything, or act as if they never cared, they are only delaying the healing process. Repressed grief doesn't go away. It builds up. Sooner or later, it resurfaces in the form of frustration, irritability, or even apathy. Stoicism teaches a different path. Rather than denying grief, the correct approach is to acknowledge it, accept its presence, and allow it to run its course without resistance. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic emperors, wrote that it is not the events themselves that upset us, but rather our judgments about them. When we understand that grief is a natural and temporary reaction, we stop fighting it, and, ironically, it loses the power it once had over us. The first step to silent detachment, then, is not to become numb, but to learn to feel without clinging. No resistance, no repression, just letting emotions come and go, like clouds passing through the sky. Now, if trying to force detachment is a mistake, what happens when we cling to the very idea of detachment? This is where a paradox arises that few realize. The more one tries to forcibly let go of something, the more attached to it one remains. This is the silent paradox of detachment. The conscious attempt to let go of something can actually strengthen the bond with the thing one wants to let go of. This happens because when one tries to let go of an attachment, one continues to give attention and energy to it. It's like trying to forget a nagging thought. The more one tries to push it away, the more it sticks in one's mind. Real detachment comes not from an active effort to cut ties, but from a subtle shift in perspective, realizing that nothing really belongs to us. The Stoics had a powerful concept called amor fati, or loving fate. Instead of fighting what happens or trying to control what cannot be controlled, they accepted events as part of the natural order of the universe. This includes loss, change, and letting go. Imagine someone holding a handful of sand in their hand. The tighter they squeeze, the faster the sand slips through their fingers. But if the hand remains open, the sand simply rests there, effortlessly. The same is true of everything in life. Relationships, status, possessions, expectations. Holding on tightly creates suffering. Holding on lightly brings freedom. Silent detachment requires not resistance, but acceptance. It is not about withdrawing from the world or avoiding connections, but about changing our relationship to things. Instead of saying, "I need this to be happy," we say, "If it is here, great. If it is not, that is also okay." The key is to let go without having to let go. To stop entertaining the idea of loss and instead recognize that everything in life is temporary. But how do you know if you've reached this level of detachment? There's a simple test that can reveal whether you're still attached to something without realizing it. There's a straightforward question that can reveal how much you're actually practicing silent detachment. If I lost this today, would my identity collapse? This answer may be uncomfortable, but it's essential. If the thought of losing something, whether it's a relationship, a social status, a treasured object, or even an ideal, causes you extreme anxiety, it indicates a deep attachment. The problem isn't with what's been lost, but with how it's become part of your identity. The Stoics taught that everything external to us is, by definition, unstable. Nothing is guaranteed. People leave, possessions are lost, opportunities disappear. And if our identity is tied to something like this, we're bound to suffer. Think of someone who defines themselves exclusively by their work. If that job is taken away, the person feels like they have lost themselves, or someone whose self-worth depends on a relationship. When the bond is broken, there is not just sadness, there is a collapse of identity. This is not just emotional pain, it is a psychological prison. Silent detachment means building an identity independent of external factors. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should be like the rock against which the waves beat, but which remains firm. He did not say to ignore the waves, but to understand that they come and go, while the rock remains. The test of detachment is not to eliminate ties or become insensitive. On the contrary, it allows one to enjoy all that life offers without fear of loss. A romantic relationship can be lighter when one does not fear its end. A job can be more enjoyable when one does not depend on it to validate one's existence. Real freedom comes when the answer to the initial question becomes, "No, I would not collapse. I would move on." But if this is so clear, why do we still cling? There is an invisible mental trap that keeps us stuck in what should have gone. What really holds us back is not the attachment itself, but the story we tell ourselves about it. When something goes, a relationship, a phase of life, an opportunity, the pain comes not just from the loss, but from the narrative we create about it. The mind doesn't just accept facts, it constructs meanings, and it's these meanings that trap us. Think of someone who has lost a job. The objective fact is simple. The job is gone. But the story they tell themselves might be, "This means I'm a failure," or "I'll never find anything as good again." Similarly, after a relationship ends, the fact is that the connection is over. But the narrative might become, "I'll never be happy again," or "This was the only person who truly understood me." These stories create invisible loops that keep us stuck in the past. The more we repeat these narratives, the more they seem like absolute truths. The Stoics, however, had a method for escaping this trap: consciously rewriting history. Epictetus taught that it is not events that affect us, but our interpretation of them. If you change the narrative, you change the emotional experience. Instead of saying, "I missed something important," your mind can learn to say, "This has served its purpose and made room for something new." A powerful tool for practicing this shift is a philosophical journal. Writing daily about events and their interpretations allows you to identify thought patterns and reframe stories more objectively. Over time, your mind learns to let go of what should have gone. Quiet detachment does not require forgetting or becoming indifferent, but rather learning to look at the past without holding on to it. This brings us to a key teaching of the great Stoics: how those who have lost everything still find freedom. The great masters of Stoicism have left us a precious legacy of how detachment can be a gateway to freedom. Epictetus, for example, began his life as a slave. He lost everything: his physical freedom, his status, and his possessions, and yet, he became one of the most influential philosophers in history. The key to his peace was not in seeking control of the external world, but in accepting that nothing truly belongs to us. In his Enchiridion handbook, Epictetus writes, "It is not things that disturb us, but our opinion of them." He knew that life's events are inevitable, but how we interpret them is what determines whether we suffer or we are free. When Epictetus lost his freedom, he did not cling to the pain of loss. He adjusted his perception, and in this way gained true freedom, the freedom from being dominated by circumstances. The same applies to Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor. He was constantly surrounded by wars, political intrigues, and death, yet he maintained a calm mind. In his Meditations, he writes, "What is not good for the hive is not good for the bee," emphasizing the importance of accepting life's events as part of a greater natural process rather than fighting against them. For Marcus Aurelius, life was not about controlling external events, but about how to respond to them. True wisdom lay in not clinging to what fate brings, but in making the best of the possibilities we have. Their story is a clear reminder that detachment comes not from the loss of possessions or people, but from the realization that we never truly possess anything. The Stoics did not cling to what could be lost, because they understood that everything is temporary, and in this understanding, they were freer than many of us will ever imagine. This detachment does not imply coldness or lack of affection. On the contrary, it allows us to be more present and appreciate what life has to offer, without the obsession of wanting to ensure the permanence of these things. To understand true detachment, we need to look at the stories of these masters and understand how external circumstances did not determine their inner peace. Now that we see how the practice of detachment is reflected in history, it is time to explore an unexpected solution that can change our relationship with detachment. The simplest and most effective solution to cultivating silent detachment can be found in something often underestimated: humor. That's right, laughter. A powerful tool that the great Stoic philosophers used to keep their minds calm and prevent the adversities of life from overpowering them. When we talk about detachment, we often think of something serious and profound, as if a rigid and austere posture were necessary. However, the Stoics knew that lightness in life can be one of the greatest allies in the search for inner peace. Seneca, for example, used to write about how humor can be a way to lighten the weight of difficult situations. He suggested that when we are faced with something that upsets us, laughing at our own distress can often be more liberating than trying to control or stifle the emotion. Imagine that when faced with a loss or frustration, instead of getting caught up in thoughts of despair or revenge, you simply allow yourself to see the situation in a lighter way, even with a touch of irony. This is the kind of healthy distance that humor provides. It is not about ignoring the pain, but about disarming it, allowing it to dissipate naturally without paralyzing us. By integrating humor into our lives, we can lessen the intensity of situations that would normally trap us in suffering. Laughing at our own limitations, at our own relentless search for control, makes these anxieties lose their power. And with that, silent detachment becomes a much more accessible practice. What the Stoics teach us is that life is unpredictable and often painful. But instead of resisting or suffering in silence, we can learn to laugh at our own struggle against what we cannot control. When letting go is not a battle, but a calm and even humorous acceptance, it becomes more natural and less threatening. Life, after all, is already full of challenges. So why not let humor be one of the most effective weapons for maintaining serenity? By doing this, we are actually exercising a much deeper detachment, one that comes from within. Silent detachment is not about becoming a cold, distant, or indifferent person to life. Rather, it's about learning to flow with life, without clinging to what we can't control. It is understanding that, in the end, the only thing that is truly ours is our ability to choose how to react to the events that come our way. The Stoics teach us that suffering arises from resistance to that which we cannot change. When we accept things as they are, Without the weight of expectation or anxiety, we find freedom. Freedom to live the present moment more lightly, to value relationships and experiences without fear of loss, and to understand that what really matters is how we relate to what life offers us and not what life takes away from us. Silent detachment is present in the small details of everyday life, in our reactions to unexpected events, in changes of plans, and even in our own judgments. It is a daily practice that allows us to be more present, calmer, and more at peace with the flow of life. By learning to practice it, we can free our hearts from the bonds of the past and the future, and live more fully, more consciously, and more freely. Detachment is not an end, but a path to inner peace, to serenity in the face of adversity, and above all, to a truer life. The secret, therefore, is simple. Instead of fighting what we cannot control, let us embrace the freedom that comes from accepting what is. When we do this, we find a silent power that frees us and allows us to live more fully and lightly.